I was resting at my ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, when, at 5 a.m., the security alarm went off. The guard called me, nervous. His daughter-in-law and son arrived with movers. They want you to leave. They say this place is theirs. I took a slow sip of my tea and smiled. Let them pass. They are about to find out what I did yesterday. Gratitude easily transforms into expectation, and from there to entitlement is only a small step. This bitter truth has been the most painful lesson of my 72 years of life. As I watched from my bedroom window, seeing 3 moving trucks cross the main gate of my ranch. Sunrise Ranch. I felt a strange calm. For 40 years I had built this place stone by stone, turning what was arid land into a 12-acre paradise overlooking the lake, with stables, orchards, and a main house that reflected the exact vision I had from the first day. Now my daughter-in-law Danielle was coming to claim it as her own. My son Ethan followed her, as always, a shadow with no will of his own, not since they got married 8 years ago. I took another sip of my cinnamon tea, prepared especially by Mrs. Lucy, who had worked for me for 30 years. As I listened to the gravel crunch under the tires of the luxury SUV that stopped in front of the house, I didn't bother to go out to greet them. I knew exactly how this scene would unfold, and I preferred to observe it from the dignity of my position. The pounding on the front door echoed through the house. Mrs. Lucy looked at me with concern from the threshold of my room. "Mr. Monroe, do you want me to open it?" "Of course, Lucy. He is my son, after all." The angry voices were soon heard from the foyer. Danielle's heels struck the marble floor as if they wanted to pierce it, approaching my room with military determination. "James! What a surprise to find you here." Her voice faked politeness, but the contempt seeped through like moisture in old bricks. "We thought you would be in the city for your medical checkup." I turned slowly in my armchair to face her. Danielle, with her impeccable tailored suit despite the hour, her perfect makeup and shiny black hair, looked ready for a photo shoot, not a move. "Good morning, Danielle. Good morning, son," I greeted calmly, noticing how Ethan avoided my gaze. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this early visit? And with moving trucks, no less." "This is not a visit, father-in-law," she replied, quickly abandoning the facade of cordiality. "We are coming to take possession of what belongs to us. Ethan has explained to me that this ranch would eventually be his, and we have decided to advance the process." "Is that true, son?" I asked, addressing Ethan directly, who seemed to find the pattern of the Persian rug under his feet fascinating. "Dad, you always said that everything you built would be for us one day," he finally muttered. "With your current condition and the expansion of our operations, we thought it would be better if you took a break in the city. The penthouse has better medical facilities nearby." "I see," I replied, getting up slowly from my armchair. "And my opinion on this, advancing the process, is not relevant?" "James," Danielle interrupted, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who believes they have all the winning cards. "Let's be practical. You are already at an age where you need constant attention. This place is too isolated for someone with your limitations. Ethan and I can make better use of it. Besides, we have already begun to modernize the ranch's operations to integrate it into our hotel chain." "Interesting." I took a few steps towards the window, watching the movers begin to unload boxes. "And I suppose you have documentation to support this transfer of ownership." Danielle smiled with the smugness I had always found particularly irritating in her. She took a folder with documents from her designer briefcase. "Of course. Here is the power of attorney you signed 2 years ago, giving Ethan authority to manage your properties in case of incapacity. And here is the medical evaluation, which confirms your condition of moderate cognitive decline, justifying the activation of said power." I took the documents and reviewed them carefully, nodding occasionally as if I were impressed. "This is all very meticulous. There is only one small problem." "Problem?" Danielle's smile wavered slightly. "Yes. These documents no longer have legal validity." "What do you mean?" For the first time, I noticed a flash of unease in her perfectly lined eyes. "I mean, dear daughter-in-law, that yesterday I visited the notary Frank Morris in the city. the same one who supposedly certified my cognitive decline. It turns out that good old Frank has an excellent memory and does not remember signing such an evaluation. In fact, he was quite appalled to see that his signature had been forged so skillfully. Ethan turned visibly pale. Danielle maintained her composure, although I noticed her knuckles turning white as she gripped her briefcase. That's absurd. This document is perfectly in order. I also visited my primary care physician, Dr. Evans, who apparently signed this evaluation, curiously. He also doesn't remember diagnosing me with cognitive decline. In fact, my last full checkup 3 weeks ago shows that I am in excellent condition for a man of my age. I took a step towards my desk and opened a drawer, taking out a folder similar to hers, but with the notary's seal clearly visible on the cover. What I did do yesterday, besides filing a complaint for forgery of documents, was formally modify my will and revoke all previous powers of attorney. I also had a long conversation with my lawyer about the legal implications of attempting to appropriate private property using fraudulent documents. The silence that followed was so thick you could almost touch it. Mrs. Lucy, who had witnessed the entire scene from the doorway, discreetly withdrew, although I could see the shadow of a smile on her wrinkled face. "Dad, there must be a misunderstanding," Ethan began, finally finding his voice. "We just wanted to." "Misunderstanding?" I interrupted him, maintaining a calm tone that contrasted with the storm I felt inside. "Is it a misunderstanding to forge signatures? Is it a misunderstanding to invent medical conditions? Is it a misunderstanding to arrive with moving trucks at dawn to expel your own father from his home?" "James!" Danielle intervened, trying to regain control of the situation. "Clearly there has been an error in communication. Our intention was simply to help you transition to an environment more appropriate for your well-being. Save the explanations, Danielle. I have known you for 8 years, and in each one, you have shown exactly who you are. What hurts me deeply," I said, turning to my son, "is seeing who you have become, Ethan." My son's face showed a mixture of shame and defiance that I had never seen before. It was like observing a stranger who coincidentally looked like the child I had raised. "I suggest you inform your moving team that there has been a misunderstanding," I continued. "This ranch is still mine, and it will remain so until I decide otherwise. And you can be sure that, after what happened today, that decision has changed significantly." "Are you threatening us?" Danielle asked, recovering her usual aggressiveness. "Not at all. I am simply clarifying the current legal situation. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a video conference in 20 minutes with my legal team to finalize some details about the new distribution of my assets. You are free to stay for breakfast, if you like. Mrs. Lucy makes exceptional biscuits and gravy." I went to my desk and sat down, effectively turning my back on them as I turned on my computer. In the reflection of the window, I saw Danielle clench her fists in frustration before turning on her heels and leaving the room. Ethan hesitated for a moment. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but finally, he followed her in silence. From my window, I watched them argue heatedly next to their SUV before giving instructions to the confused moving employees. In less than 15 minutes, the trucks were turning around and leaving the way they had entered, followed by the SUV that sped off, kicking up dust on the road. Only then did I allow the tremor in my hands to manifest completely, not from fear, but from a mixture of sadness and contained anger that threatened to overflow. At what point had I lost my son so completely? How did I not see the signs? My name is James Monroe. I was born in 1,951 inches, a small town in rural Wyoming, the son of a farmer and a rural teacher who taught me that dignity is priceless and that honest work eventually bears fruit, even if the tree takes time to grow. With effort and determination, I managed to be the first in my family to attend university. I studied agricultural engineering at UC Davis, where I discovered my passion for sustainable agriculture long before it became a trend. I worked for years on government projects, learning the ins and outs of American bureaucracy while dreaming of implementing my own ideas. At 30, I risked all my savings to buy an abandoned piece of land in Jackson Hole, My colleagues thought I had lost my mind. The place was eroded, without infrastructure, and too far from traditionally productive areas. But I saw beyond its current state. I visualized fruit trees, green fields, and eventually, a business model that combined sustainable agriculture with exclusive rural tourism. My wife Martha, whom I had met during my university years, shared my vision, although not my unwavering optimism. "It will take us decades to make this place what you imagine," she told me, as we toured the dusty terrain for the first time. "Then we'll start today," I replied. And that afternoon we planted the first tree together, an avocado tree, which would eventually become the patriarch of our first commercial orchard. The first 10 years were brutally difficult. We lived in a small, simple house that we built with the help of local workers. Every penny I earned as an agricultural consultant, I reinvested in the ranch. We installed irrigation systems, improved the soil, strategically planted native trees to prevent erosion, and gradually, Sunrise Ranch began to flourish. Ethan was born during that period, in 1983. I remember holding him in my arms while I showed him the horizon from our hill. "All this will be yours someday," I told the small bundle that was barely opening his eyes. Not just the land, but the knowledge of how to care for it and make it prosper. As the ranch grew, so did our family. Laura was born 4 years after Ethan, completing what I considered my living legacy. I raised them among trees and crops, trying to transmit to them not only practical knowledge, but also fundamental values, respect for nature, perseverance, and the satisfaction of a job well done. The turning point for our business came when we started producing certified organic avocados at a time when international demand was taking off. Our sustainable methods and consistent quality won us contracts with premium exporters, and we soon expanded to other fruits and specialized products. At 50, when many start thinking about retiring, I began the second phase of my plan to turn a portion of the ranch into an exclusive ecotourism destination. We built luxury cabins integrated into the landscape, a restaurant that used our own products, and immersive experiences that allowed urban visitors to reconnect with nature without giving up comfort. The success of this model exceeded our expectations. Soon, Sunrise Ranch became a coveted destination for celebrities, executives looking to escape stress, and foreigners willing to pay premium rates for the authentic experience we offered. It was during this time of prosperity that the changes in my family began. Ethan, who had studied business administration at Wharton, showed less and less interest in the fundamental aspects of the business, and more in the possibilities of rapid expansion and alliances with external investors. "Dad, you're thinking too small," he told me during one of our many discussions. "We could replicate this model in 10 different locations. There's capital available. We just need the vision to seize it. This place is what it is precisely because we don't treat it as a replicable model," I replied. Every tree. I soon noticed subtle but significant changes. Ethan began to talk about capitalizing on our brand and monetizing the authentic experience. Corporate language infiltrated conversations about what had always been a deeply personal project, rooted in family values. "We need to standardize processes if we want to expand," he insisted during our monthly meetings. "High-level clients expect consistency. What they expect is authenticity," I replied. During this painful period, Ethan took on more responsibilities in the business, which I deeply appreciated, although I noticed that his decisions often contradicted our fundamental philosophy. After Martha's death, I fell into a period of deep mourning. I immersed myself in the physical work of the ranch, finding some comfort in the predictable cycle of nature: planting, growth, harvest, rest. Meanwhile, I delegated more administrative aspects to Ethan, who seemed anxious to implement his modernization ideas. It was during this vulnerable period that Danielle appeared in our lives. He met her at a sustainable tourism congress in Miami, where she represented an international hotel chain interested in the green market. Intelligent, ambitious, and with impressive connections, Danielle initially seemed like a good influence on my son, motivating him to think more strategically. However, even if the tree takes time to grow, with effort and determination, I managed to be the first in my family to attend university. I studied agricultural engineering at UC Davis, where I discovered my passion for sustainable agriculture long before it became a trend. I worked for years on government projects, learning the ins and outs of American bureaucracy while dreaming of implementing my own ideas. At 30, I risked all my savings to buy an abandoned piece of land in Jackson Hole. They don't want a standardized experience they could get at any five-star resort. These philosophical differences deepened after their marriage to Danielle in 2015. The wedding, held at our ranch, was an ostentatious event that had little to do with the values of simplicity and connection with nature that we had cultivated for decades. Guests arriving in private helicopters carelessly trampled meticulously designed gardens, while air-conditioned tents and noisy generators temporarily transformed our sanctuary into something unrecognizable. "It's just one day," Laura, my daughter, told me, trying to calm me down when I expressed my discomfort. Let them enjoy it their way. But it wasn't just one day. It was a harbinger of the direction the business would take under their combined influence. In the following years, I watched with growing concern how they implemented changes that fundamentally contradicted our original vision. Our sustainable production model was gradually relegated to a tourist attraction, while the cabins were renovated with unnecessary luxuries and prices that excluded the loyal clientele we had cultivated over the years. More alarming, they began to acquire nearby properties to expand what they now called the Sunrise Group, using considerable loans that put the financial stability we had worked so hard to build at risk. When I expressed concerns, I was systematically ignored, or, worse, treated with condescension. "The market has changed, Dad," Ethan explained with exaggerated patience. "We either adapt or we get left behind. Not all change is progress," I replied. Not all progress requires abandoning fundamental principles. The tension reached a critical point when I discovered they had signed a preliminary contract to sell our organic orchards to a developer interested in building additional luxury villas. Land that we had nurtured for decades, that provided stable jobs to local families and produced some of the best organic products in the state, would be converted into another generic experience for wealthy tourists. I confronted Ethan in his office. Every stone has a story and a specific purpose. He would roll his eyes at what he considered my rural romanticism, as he called it. He didn't see that it was precisely this careful and personalized approach that differentiated us in an increasingly saturated market. The situation became significantly complicated when Martha received a diagnosis of a degenerative disease in 2013. The next 2 years were a whirlwind of treatments, specialists, and hopes that gradually faded. "Life is not just math, son. There are commitments we have made to this land, to the people who depend on it." "Commitments you made," Danielle intervened, who had been silently observing from an armchair in the corner. "Ethan and I have to think about the future, not about sentimental promises from the past." That comment, delivered with the calculating coldness I had come to associate with her, perfectly crystallized the abyss that had opened between us. It was not simply a difference in business strategy, but a fundamental divergence in values and worldview. As the legal owner of this land, "I do not authorize this sale," I said finally, "and until I see a significant change in the direction you are taking, I will reconsider my succession plan for Sunrise Ranch." The implicit threat did not go unnoticed. Danielle narrowed her eyes, while Ethan finally tore his gaze from his screen to face me directly. "Are you saying you would consider disinheriting us?" he asked with incredulity. "After all we've done to modernize and grow what was essentially a family farm?" "I'm saying that I don't recognize the values that are guiding your decisions, and that my legacy is much more than properties and bank accounts. If you can't respect that, then I must reconsider how to best protect what Martha and I built." I left the office feeling simultaneously the weight of the confrontation and a certain relief at having finally expressed what I had been observing for years. However, I did not fully anticipate the reaction that would follow. In the following weeks, I noticed subtle but disturbing changes. Administrative staff who had reported directly to me for years began to filter my requests through appropriate channels, according to new policy. a modern addition to the ranch that contrasted aggressively with the local architecture we had carefully preserved. "This is unacceptable," I said, placing the contract on his glass desk. "This land not only has commercial value, but cultural and historical value for this community." "Dad, we need to be practical," he replied, without looking up from his computer. "The margins in agricultural production are minimal compared to the real estate potential. It's simple math. My medication for high blood pressure, a controlled condition I had managed for years, suddenly seemed less effective, leaving me occasionally dizzy or confused during critical discussions. In retrospect, I should have recognized these tactics for what they were: a systematic attempt to undermine my authority and, potentially, my legal capacity to maintain control over my properties. But the idea that my own son would participate in such a manipulation seemed so aberrant that I initially sought alternative explanations. It was Laura, my daughter, who finally confirmed my suspicions during one of her rare visits from Chicago, where she worked as a researcher in sustainable agriculture. "Dad, there's something you need to know," she told me one afternoon as we walked through the orchards. "Ethan and Danielle have been consulting with a lawyer specialized in incapacity cases. They have mentioned to some common friends that they are worried about your cognitive decline and the need to intervene before you make harmful decisions for the business." The revelation, although shocking, confirmed patterns I had been observing. With this new clarity, I began to meticulously document every interaction, every decision, every unexplained change in my routine or medication. I discreetly installed security cameras in my office and room. I changed my routines, taking my medications only from bottles that I kept personally secure. I also began to plan contingencies, consulting my own lawyer in the city, someone without prior connections to the family business. I reviewed options to protect both my personal autonomy and the legacy that had cost me so much to build. It was in the midst of these discreet preparations that I noticed the arrangements for what Danielle called extensive modernization of the main house: architectural plans, material samples, and eventually communication about scheduled dates to start significant renovations that, effectively, would temporarily displace me. "We thought it would be more comfortable for you to stay in the city penthouse during the work," Ethan mentioned casually during dinner. "It will probably take several months, and the dust and noise wouldn't be good for your health. The penthouse in Denver, acquired years ago as a base of operations for business meetings, was luxurious but impersonal. More importantly, it would effectively isolate me from the ranch and daily operations for a prolonged period." "That's very considerate of you," I replied with apparent gratitude. "When are you scheduled to start these renovations?" "The contractors arrive next week," Danielle chimed in. "We have already selected all the materials and approved the final designs. You will love the results, James." The fact that such significant decisions about my main residence had been made without substantial consultation confirmed that the plan to marginalize me was advancing faster than I had anticipated. It was time to accelerate my own preparations. The next day, claiming a routine medical appointment, I headed to Denver for a series of critical meetings. First, with my primary care physician for a complete evaluation of my cognitive and physical state. After, operational decisions were made and implemented without my prior knowledge. Even Mrs. Lucy, my trusted housekeeper, mentioned that Danielle had suggested that maybe it was time for her to consider retiring to enjoy her family. Simultaneously, a more insidious campaign began. Important meetings were rescheduled without notifying me, making me look forgetful when I mentioned the original dates. Documents I had reviewed appeared with changes I swore I had not authorized, savoring the peace of the ranch I loved so much. From my window I could see the orchards lit by the moon, the stables where we raised purebred horses, and beyond, the cabins where guests enjoyed the authentic experience we had carefully created over decades. How had we reached this point? At what point did the legitimate desire for innovation transform into greed disconnected from fundamental values? And how had I not seen the signs until the situation had deteriorated so dramatically? These questions accompanied me as I prepared for sleep. not knowing that I would be abruptly awakened at 5 inches the morning by the security alarm, and a call that would confirm exactly how far my son and his wife were willing to go in their quest to take control of my legacy. The noise of engines and voices outside confirmed that the confrontation had reached its critical point faster than I anticipated. From my window, I watched as Danielle directed the moving workers with impatient gestures, while Ethan remained in the SUV, apparently busy with his phone. Mrs. Lucy entered my room discreetly with a fresh cup of tea. "Mr. Monroe, what do we do? Those men are unloading furniture as if they were the new owners. Stay calm, Lucy. This situation will be resolved soon. Please, tell Joaquin to let them in when they reach the main door." While I waited, I mentally reviewed each document I had signed the day before, each recorded conversation, each legal protection implemented. The anticipation was not for fear, but for a strange mixture of sadness and determination. What was about to happen would irrevocably change our family dynamic, but it was necessary to preserve something much more important than temporarily harmonious relationships. The confrontation in my room, although painful, had proceeded exactly as I anticipated. What Ethan and Danielle did not understand was that their aggressive move, far from securing them the control they sought, had accelerated precisely the scenario they were trying to prevent. After they left, with their dignity wounded and plans frustrated, I went to my desk for a video call that, contrary to what I had implied, was not with my legal team, but with Laura, my daughter. "How did it all go?" she asked immediately, her concern evident even through the screen. She was in her lab in Chicago, surrounded by experimental plants that reflected her commitment to sustainable agricultural innovation. "Exactly as we expected," I replied, finally feeling the emotional weight of the confrontation. They arrived with moving trucks and forged documents, convinced they could simply take possession of the ranch. "And the documents you signed yesterday? Everything is in order. The new will, the revocation of prior powers of attorney, the official medical evaluations, the complaint for forgery. Everything is ready, and the trust completely established and legally bulletproof. Sunrise Ranch is no longer in my personal name, but protected by a structure that guarantees the continuity of our original vision, regardless of who tries to take control." Laura nodded with approval, mixed with a certain sadness. "I never thought we would reach this point, Dad. I always believed that Ethan would eventually understand the real value of what you built." "Me too, daughter, but sometimes people choose paths that we cannot foresee or prevent. The important thing now is to protect the greater legacy, not just the land and the business, but the principles that sustain them. When will you tell them about the complete restructuring?" "They will probably try some other legal strategy in the next few days. When they do, they will receive official notification about the new structure of ownership and governance of the ranch." What Ethan and Danielle would eventually discover, when they consulted official records or attempted new legal maneuvers, was a fundamental transformation in the ownership structure of Sunrise Ranch. The previous day, I had legally transferred the entire ranch and its associated operations into an irrevocable trust with multiple layers of protection. This trust, governed by a board that included Laura, representatives of the local community, and experts in sustainable agriculture and responsible ecotourism, would guarantee that the ranch would continue to operate according to the fundamental principles that had guided its development for 4 decades. I would maintain vital rights of residents and active participation in the operations, but the property itself was no longer subject to inheritance disputes or opportunistic manipulations. Ethan and Danielle would receive reasonable financial benefits as recognition for their legitimate contributions, but without the unilateral control they clearly sought. More importantly, the workers who had dedicated decades to the ranch would have guaranteed job security. The community programs would continue, and the sustainable methods that had defined our operation would be contractually preserved. "Do you think they will ever understand why it was necessary to do this?" Laura asked, vocalizing the question that had been hovering in my mind. Maybe eventually, or maybe not. What I do know is that I did what was necessary to protect something bigger than egos or temporary ambitions. After finishing the call, I went to the porch to watch the sunset over the fields that I had cultivated with so much love for decades. The fresh air of Jackson Hole, loaded with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers, reminded me why this place deserved to be protected. Difficult decisions frequently seem impossible, until we recognize that the alternative, abandoning fundamental principles for temporary comfort, is the true impossibility for those who value integrity above superficially harmonious relationships. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and purple, I felt a strange peace. The morning's confrontation, although painful, had been necessary to catalyze the transformation that would preserve what was truly important, not just lands and buildings, but a vision, a set of values, a legacy that transcended individual ambitions. My daughter-in-law had knocked at 5 inches the morning, demanding that I leave, convinced that this ranch belonged to her by right. What she didn't know was that, thanks to what I did yesterday, Sunrise Ranch no longer belonged to any individual, but to the principles and the community that had made it prosper, a lesson that perhaps one day she would understand, although it might come too late to repair the bridges burned by her own ambition. The official notification arrived exactly as I had anticipated, 3 days after the failed confrontation, when Ethan and Danielle, evidently, had consulted with their legal team about available alternatives. The courier, a young man in a formal suit, who clearly felt uncomfortable delivering documents in the middle of the vineyards where I was supervising the seasonal pruning, handed me an envelope with the letterhead of Green, Davis and Associates, a firm known for representing aggressive corporate clients. "Thank you, young man," I said calmly, signing the acknowledgement of receipt. "Would you like a glass of water or fresh juice before heading back? The road to the main highway is quite dusty this season." His expression of surprise at my serenity caused me some internal amusement. What did he expect? A trembling old man, devastated by legal actions from his own son? "No, thank you, sir. I must continue with other deliveries." As his vehicle drove away, I meticulously opened the envelope. Its content was predictably hostile, a formal letter questioning the legal validity of my recent actions, alleging they had been carried out under undue influence and without full capacity, along with a barely veiled threat of extensive litigation if I did not reconsider the precipitous decisions made during a period of emotional instability. The document concluded by offering an amicable resolution, through a meeting with a mediator selected by them, where we could discuss a transition structure that respects their historical contributions while allowing for the necessary modernization under the leadership of the new generation. The carefully calibrated terminology, combining barely disguised condescension with specific legal threats, clearly bore Danielle's mark. I could perfectly imagine her dictating each calculated phrase, probably with Ethan nodding silently by her side. I carefully folded the letter and put it in my shirt pocket as I continued to supervise the pruning. The workers, many of whom had been with us for decades, continued to animatedly discuss the specific techniques developed for our high-altitude vineyards, apparently oblivious to the legal drama that was unfolding. Their deep knowledge, passed down through generations and complemented with carefully selected innovations, was precisely the type of intangible value that Ethan and Danielle seemed incapable of recognizing, but that represented the true heart of Sunrise Ranch. Back in the main house, I found Mrs. Lucy preparing fresh lemonade in the kitchen, her expression revealing barely contained curiosity about the content of the letter. "Bad news, Mr. Monroe?" she finally asked, as she served me an iced glass. "Not exactly, Lucy. Let's just say expected news," I replied, enjoying the perfectly balanced sour and sweet taste that only she could achieve. "Do you know if Mr. Wallace confirmed his visit for this afternoon?" "Yes, sir. He said he would arrive at approximately 4, along with Mrs. Turner." "Excellent. Please prepare the small meeting room and something light to accompany the coffee." While I waited for the arrival of my legal team, I reviewed again the complete documentation of the trust established days ago. The structure, meticulously designed to balance asset protection with responsible operational flexibility, represented the culmination of reflections developed over previous years. As I observed the worrying evolution in values demonstrated by Ethan, under the growing influence of Danielle. The central element of the trust, fully implemented but not yet publicly communicated, was the irrevocable transfer of legal ownership of the entire ranch to a structure governed by a specialized board. This board, strategically composed of Laura, 3 veteran executives absolutely loyal to the original vision, 2 representatives of the local community, and an independent specialist in sustainable agriculture, would guarantee operational continuity aligned with fundamental principles while allowing for carefully evaluated innovations. The most important part, from a personal perspective, was the specific provision granting me vital rights as founding guardian, with special authority to veto decisions potentially contradictory to the essential values of the project. This position, legally bulletproof against challenges based on mental capacity or age, guaranteed that as long as I lived, no radical reconfiguration could be implemented against the original principles. Ethan and Danielle, contrary to the impression they undoubtedly had at the moment, were not completely excluded from the new structure. The trust specifically assigned an executive position for Ethan within the tourism division, with appropriate compensation and a minority share on the board of directors. However, crucially, this position required verifiable adherence to the established ethical and environmental alignments, with specific mechanisms for removal if fundamental principles were systematically violated. As I reviewed these details, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation experienced during recent weeks. The apparently sophisticated conspiracy to declare me incapable had catapulted the implementation of protections that, honestly, I should have established years earlier. When the first signs of a fundamental divergence in values became evident, the discreet chime of the front door announced the arrival of Robert Wallace, my lawyer specialized in estate trusts, and Megan Turner, the forensic accountant, with extensive experience in complex corporate structures, both professionals, selected specifically for their unwavering integrity and complete disconnection from the social circles frequented by Ethan and Danielle, had been instrumental in the technical implementation of the complete restructuring. James, Robert greeted as we entered the meeting room. I assume you received the anticipated communication from the opposing party. Indeed, I replied, handing him the letter received hours before. It has exactly the arguments and tone we anticipated. Megan quickly reviewed the document before smiling, with an expression that combined professional amusement with barely contained indignation. Fascinating how they try to characterize a structure meticulously implemented over months as a precipitous decision during a period of instability. They clearly underestimate the extent of the preparation carried out, and the exhaustive documentation established precisely to counteract these specific allegations, Robert added, opening his portfolio to extract a meticulously organized folder. The independent cognitive evaluations, multiple notarial certifications, professional testimonies, and, of course, the clear evidence on the forged documents they tried to use previously. For the next hour, we methodically reviewed the official response strategy that would be delivered early tomorrow. The document, technically impeccable, but humanly devastating, would not only categorically reject the allegations presented, but would also clearly establish the potential consequences if they decided to escalate the legal confrontation. The complete public exposure of the documented manipulation, the potential criminal implications for forgery, and the detailed revelation of the questionable maneuvers implemented during the previous months. The letter concludes by offering a constructive alternative through acceptance of the structure already implemented, Robert explained as we reviewed the final draft. It emphasizes the significant benefits for all parties involved, while making the fundamental irreversibility of the changes made unequivocally clear. Do you anticipate prolonged resistance? I asked. Considering the deep knowledge both professionals had of the personalities involved after months of preparation, Megan and Robert exchanged brief glances before she responded with characteristic frankness. Based on the analysis of previous behavior and discreet consultations with colleagues who know the legal representatives they recently hired, the complete public exposure of the documented manipulation, the potential criminal implications for forgery, and the detailed revelation of the questionable maneuvers implemented during the previous months, The letter concludes by offering a constructive alternative through acceptance of the structure already implemented. Robert explained as we reviewed the final draft. It emphasizes the significant benefits for all parties involved. Devastated by legal actions from his own son? No, thank you, sir. I must continue with other deliveries. As his vehicle drove away, I meticulously opened the envelope. Its content was predictably hostile, a formal letter questioning the legal validity of my recent actions, alleging they had been carried out under undue influence and without full capacity, along with a barely veiled threat of extensive litigation. Every aspect has been specifically designed to withstand precisely the type of lateral attacks they will likely attempt eventually. As we concluded the meeting and I accompanied the visitors to the exit, I simultaneously experienced deep sadness for the relational deterioration evidenced and calm resolution about the actions implemented. The ranch, fully visible from the main entrance during a particularly beautiful sunset. We anticipate significant initial resistance, followed by a reluctant acceptance, when they fully understand the legal strength of the established position. She paused momentarily before continuing. However, the underlying family dynamic suggests a high probability that they will continue to seek alternatives to undermine the implemented structure, even if they initially feign strategic acceptance. Her assessment, although painful from a personal perspective, perfectly crystallized the fundamental motivation underlying the recent actions, the protection of a legacy that completely transcended immediate personal considerations or traditional family relationships. As the vehicles disappeared down the rural road, I experienced a deep certainty that the decisions implemented, although painful from an immediate relational perspective, represented much more than valuable property or a successful business. It embodied the physical materialization of fundamental values developed over a lifetime. It is truly extraordinary what you have built here, James, Megan commented, as she observed the impressive panorama of vineyards, orchards, and cabins integrated perfectly with the natural landscape. I completely understand why it was so important to protect it appropriately. Her observation, although seemingly simple, the response from Ethan and Danielle came faster than anticipated. The next morning, while I was enjoying a quiet breakfast on the terrace overlooking the lake, I heard the unmistakable sound of an approaching helicopter. The noise, completely discordant with the natural tranquility of the ranch, announced a dramatic arrival that, evidently, was intended to demonstrate power and urgency. Mrs. Lucy appeared immediately, her expression divided between alarm and indignation. "Mr. Monroe, it's a helicopter from the Vantage Group," she informed, referring to the hotel conglomerate owned by Danielle's father. "They are landing in the clearing next to the stables. Thank you, Lucy. Please prepare additional coffee and some snacks. It seems we will have an unexpected visit." I continued calmly with my breakfast, as I watched the spectacle unfolding in the distance, the helicopter landing in a barely adequate space, kicking up dust that would surely irritate the purebred horses in the nearby stables. Danielle emerging first, immaculately dressed in an executive suit that contrasted absurdly with the rural setting. Ethan following her, along with two men in formal suits whom I recognized as prominent corporate lawyers. The specific choice of transport and companions communicated an intended message. They wanted to present themselves as an imposing corporate force, not as family members in a domestic dispute. This theatricality, although superficially impressive, revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the true nature of the conflict we were facing. Joaquin, the head of security, intercepted the group as they approached the main house. From my position, I could see a tense exchange but not hear the exact words. Eventually, after a brief radio consultation, he allowed the group to advance towards the main residence. As I heard footsteps approaching down the stone corridor, I took a final sip of coffee and prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation that would represent, with high probability, the last genuine exchange with a son I recognized less each day. "Good morning," I greeted neutrally as the group appeared on the terrace. "I see you have opted for a dramatic entrance. Would you like some coffee, Danielle?" Clearly irritated by the calm reception that contradicted her anticipated reaction, responded with an icy tone. This is not a social visit, James. We have come with legal representation to discuss the unacceptable maneuvers you have unilaterally implemented. I understand perfectly the nature of your visit, I replied, motioning towards the available chairs around the table. However, important conversations deserve a civilized environment. Please, take a seat while Mrs. gradually showed a subtle but significant divergence. While she maintained a primary focus on executive control and operational flexibility for the implementation of her modernizing vision, my son occasionally expressed genuine concern for the preservation of traditional elements that evidently still held significant emotional resonance for him. This differentiation, although seemingly minor during the tense negotiation, precisely by those who had attempted systematic manipulation to declare me incapacitated, was almost painfully obvious. But I maintained a neutral expression as I replied. An interesting observation considering recent events, son. But I would prefer to hear specifically what aspects of the implemented restructuring you consider problematic. One of the lawyers, a gray-haired man with a perpetually severe expression, intervened professionally. Mr. Monroe, the unilateral transfer of family assets, conservatively valued at over $50 million, into an irrevocable trust, effectively excluding the natural heir from legitimate operational control, potentially represents a fundamental violation of succession rights protected under state law. I understand your perspective, counselor, I replied calmly. However, there seems to be a fundamental misinterpretation about the legal nature of the property in question. Sunrise Ranch was never formally designated as a family asset, subject to automatic succession, but as personal property developed over 4 decades with a specific vision, which the trust precisely preserves. As Mrs. Lucy discreetly served coffee to the unexpected guests, I continued, additionally, the documentation provided clearly establishes a significant executive position for Ethan within the new structure, with appropriate compensation and participation in decision-making, as long as he demonstrates alignment with the fundamental principles established since the founding. That is precisely the problem, Danielle interrupted, abandoning any pretense of professional formality. You have structured an entity that effectively keeps Ethan as a glorified employee on a property he should rightfully inherit completely, all under the pretext of abstract principles that, conveniently, only you can definitively interpret. Her characterization, although fundamentally incorrect, revealed precisely the central philosophical difference that had catapulted the entire conflict. The conceptualization of the ranch exclusively as a transferable material asset versus the understanding of it as a physical manifestation of specific values and community commitments developed over decades. What you consider an abstract pretext, Danielle, represents precisely the essence that distinguishes Sunrise Ranch from any generic tourist development or exchangeable real estate investment. I replied, maintaining a measured but firm tone. It is precisely these principles: authentic sustainability, community connection, responsible innovation, that have created the exceptional value that you apparently covet so intensely. Ethan, visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, tried a different approach. Dad, we understand the importance of established traditions. We simply believe they can be implemented while simultaneously modernizing operations for contemporary competitiveness. This extreme structure seems motivated more by personal distrust than legitimate business considerations. An interesting theory, I replied, looking directly at my son. Although, curiously, it completely ignores the recent events where you tried to declare me incapacitated using forged documentation. Lucy brings refreshments. The lawyers, evidently uncomfortable with the unexpected dynamic, exchanged glances before accepting the invitation. Ethan, noticeably silent since arriving, finally spoke as he took a seat opposite me. Dad, we have reviewed the documentation sent yesterday. What you have done is completely unacceptable, and frankly, surprising, considering the family values you always preached. The irony of the invocation of family values, precisely to balance multiple legitimate interests, sustainable operational continuity, preservation of employment for the local community, responsible innovation, and, yes, appropriate family participation, conditioned exclusively on the demonstration of compatible values. I replied, however, I am open to hearing specific suggestions for potential refinements that preserve the fundamental integrity of the implemented structure. Over the following hour, the discussion gradually evolved from the initial hostile confrontation towards a technical negotiation about specific aspects within the established framework. The lawyers, evidently recognizing the legal strength of the implemented position, progressively focused their attention on maximizing the benefits available within the existing structure. Rather than fundamentally questioning the trust itself, Ethan and Danielle, initially united in shared indignation, gradually showed a subtle but significant divergence. While she maintained a primary focus on executive control and operational flexibility for the implementation of her modernizing vision, my son occasionally expressed genuine concern for the preservation of traditional elements that evidently still held significant emotional resonance for him. This differentiation, although seemingly minor during the tense negotiation, potentially represented a crucial opportunity for a limited but significant reconnection with the son who, underneath the transformative influence of a strategic marriage and corporate ambition, possibly maintained a residual connection to the fundamental values instilled during previous decades. While the technical discussion continued between the lawyers over specific details of implementation, I briefly exchanged a significant look with Ethan that communicated simultaneously a shared sadness for the relational deterioration experienced and a tenuous possibility for partial reconstruction within the fundamentally transformed parameters. The meeting eventually concluded with a commitment to continue technical discussions between the respective legal teams, while the fundamental structure of the trust remained unaltered. The reluctant but inevitable acceptance of the new reality represented a significant victory for the preservation of the true legacy that Sunrise Ranch represented. As I watched the helicopter rise again over the property, kicking up unnecessary dust and temporarily disturbing the natural tranquility that defined the essence of the place, I reflected on the truly transformative nature of recent events. The conflict, although painfully personal in its immediate manifestation, fundamentally represented a clash between incompatible visions. Rapid development, focused on maximizing immediate financial benefits, versus the patient cultivation of authentic value, rooted in consistently applied sustainable principles. The implementation of the trust, although catapulted by a specific family betrayal, represented the inevitable culmination of the value divergence that had been gradually developing over previous years. Viewed from a broad perspective, it represented a natural transition from an individual project to an enduring institution, designed specifically to transcend the limitations inherent in traditional family structures, which are frequently vulnerable to precisely the type of manipulation recently experienced. As the sun reached its highest point over Sunrise Ranch, fully illuminating the extraordinary beauty methodically developed over decades of consistent work, I simultaneously experienced deep sadness for the significant relational cost and unwavering certainty about the fundamental necessity of the actions implemented. The subsequent months brought significant transformations, both in the ranch's operations and in the fundamentally reconfigured family dynamics. The full implementation of the trust, initially resisted with vehemence but eventually accepted as an irrevocable reality, catalyzed an organizational evolution that, surprisingly, preserved valuable elements from both seemingly contradictory visions. The Board of Directors, formally convened for the first time approximately 6 weeks after the initial confrontation, immediately established a balanced tone that would define the subsequent administration, a deep respect for fundamental traditions, while simultaneously embracing carefully evaluated innovations, genuinely aligned with the essential values of the project. Laura, who had traveled from Chicago specifically for the inaugural session, perfectly articulated the guiding philosophy that would orient future decisions. Our primary responsibility is to honor simultaneously the historical legacy and the future potential of Sunrise Ranch, recognizing that authentic sustainability requires both preservation and appropriate evolution. Ethan's position within the new structure evolved gradually, in an unexpected but fundamentally positive way. Initially reluctant and visibly uncomfortable during the first meetings, while simultaneously planning an unauthorized move during my supposed medical absence, the uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by the second lawyer, who apparently recognized the increasingly problematic legal terrain. Perhaps we could focus constructively on potential modifications to the established trust that would balance the legitimate interests of all parties involved, he suggested, with an evident conciliatory tone. The trust was meticulously structured, potentially represented the seed for a partial but significant reconciliation within the parameters fundamentally transformed by recent events. Danielle, predictably, adapted her strategy with a pragmatism characterized by cold but effective calculation, recognizing the practical infeasibility of a prolonged legal confrontation against a meticulously bulletproof structure. She progressively reoriented her attention towards maximizing the benefits available within the established framework, while simultaneously diversifying her personal investments into projects completely independent of the ranch. Her gradual distancing, although never explicitly discussed during the limited interactions we maintained, potentially represented a positive development, both for the operational integrity of the ranch and for the personal evolution of Ethan, who occasionally demonstrated flashes of decision-making independence, previously suppressed during a marriage characterized by a fundamentally unbalanced power dynamic. One particularly significant afternoon, approximately 4 months after the full implementation of the trust, I unexpectedly found Ethan in the old experimental vineyards, where decades ago we had begun the first tests of European varietals, specifically adapted for the unique microclimate of the region. He was silently examining the drip irrigation system that we had handcrafted when limited resources prevented the acquisition of commercial equipment. "This setup is still surprisingly efficient," he commented when he noticed my presence. "The engineers I consulted recently confirmed that our original design maintains efficiency comparable to contemporary systems that are significantly more expensive. Your mother always said that solutions born from necessity frequently surpass those developed exclusively for agriculture. The vision you implemented from the beginning was extraordinarily progressive for its time. Concepts that we currently consider innovative, integral sustainability, productive circularity, authentic community integration, were present from the original planning, when they barely represented theoretical concepts in line with current concepts. Your mother's vision was extraordinarily progressive, participating genuinely in substantive conversations about future developments, while Danielle maintained a discreet, but noticeably distanced, presence from the central operational discussions. This configuration, fundamentally different from traditional expectations about direct family continuity, but potentially more aligned with the authentic preservation of essential values, represented a tangible manifestation of the institutional evolution, frequently underestimated in contemporary corporate narratives that privilege individual visibility over genuine collaboration. Her complementary perspective consistently balanced occasionally excessive idealism with effective, but never ethically compromised, pragmatism. The subsequent conversation, which developed naturally as we toured the historic facilities, represented the most authentic exchange we had shared in previous years. Without Danielle's dominant presence, nor the immediate pressures associated with tense negotiations, we gradually rediscovered a connection founded on a shared appreciation for a project that completely transcended immediate personal considerations. This limited but significant reconnection eventually catalyzed an unexpected collaboration when Ethan proposed the implementation of a specialized educational program, using the agricultural facilities as a living laboratory for university students interested in sustainable agriculture and responsible tourism. The Trust explicitly establishes an educational component as a fundamental element of the institutional mission, he explained during a formal presentation to the Board of Directors. This program would represent a practical implementation of that commitment, while simultaneously generating significant reputational benefits and potentially diversifying income sources through strategic academic partnerships. The proposal, technically sophisticated but genuinely aligned with the foundational values, was unanimously approved by the board, providing a significant opportunity for Ethan to demonstrate effective executive capacity within the parameters clearly established by the transformed organizational structure. During the subsequent implementation of the program, I observed a gradual but consistent progression towards a more balanced and potentially sustainable professional dynamic. Ethan demonstrated growing confidence, implementing components aligned with the original vision, while simultaneously contributing genuinely valuable innovative perspectives within the clearly established value framework. This personal evolution, although significantly different from the anticipated trajectory during previous decades, when we assumed a conventional, generational transition through the direct transfer of ownership and authority, potentially represented a healthier development, both for Ethan and for the entire institution. The trust, initially implemented as a defensive mechanism against opportunistic manipulation, progressively demonstrated its transcendent institutional value by establishing a governing framework, fundamentally more robust than traditional family structures, which are frequently vulnerable, precisely to the value conflicts recently experienced. 6 months after the full implementation, during a modest celebration of the 30th anniversary of the first certified organic products marketed internationally from Sunrise Ranch, Laura perfectly captured the transformation experienced during a private conversation on the historic viewpoint with a panoramic view of the entire property. What is extraordinary, Dad, is that the structure implemented reactively, as protection against a specific threat, has evolved into an institutional model, inherently more aligned with the fundamental mission than the traditional system would have ever allowed, she observed, as we contemplated the impressive panorama illuminated by a particularly beautiful sunset. Sunrise Ranch has effectively transcended the limitations inherent in projects defined exclusively by direct family connections. Her observation perfectly crystallized the fundamental lesson, painfully distilled during the recent conflict. A truly significant legacy eventually requires institutional structures, specifically designed to transcend the inevitable limitations associated with conventional generational transitions, particularly when fundamental values diverge significantly between successive generations during the subsequent commemorative ceremony. I observed with quiet satisfaction the interaction among the diverse participants, who collectively represented the complete evolution of the project. Veteran workers, who had contributed irreplaceable traditional knowledge for decades, young professionals bringing contemporary technical perspectives, community representatives, whose families had evolved simultaneously with the ranch's development, and, significantly, Ethan, participating genuinely in substantive conversations about future developments, while Danielle maintained a discreet, but noticeably distanced, presence from the central operational discussions. This configuration, fundamentally different from traditional expectations about direct family continuity, but potentially more aligned with the authentic preservation of essential values, represented a tangible manifestation of the institutional evolution, painfully catapulted by the recent conflict. As the sun gradually descended behind the surrounding mountains, tinting the sky with golden and purple hues that had inspired the original name of the ranch decades ago, I simultaneously experienced a calm acceptance of the irreversible relational transformations and a deep appreciation for the institutional resilience emerging through the new structure. My daughter-in-law had aggressively knocked on the door at dawn, arrogantly convinced that opportunistic manipulation would guarantee her complete control over a legacy built meticulously during 4 decades of consistent work. Her action, although fundamentally destructive relationally, had catapulted the implementation of institutional protections that would paradoxically strengthen the fundamental sustainability of the project while simultaneously creating potential space for a partial but authentic reconciliation within the transformed parameters. What Danielle did not know that fateful morning, when the moving trucks awaited instructions while she imperiously demanded my immediate exit, was that the actions implemented discreetly the day before did not simply represent a defensive maneuver against an immediate threat, but the inevitable culmination of reflections developed over previous years about the true nature of a significant legacy, Sunrise Ranch, contemplated now during a symbolically appropriate sunset, as the celebration continued discreetly at the main facilities, had finally evolved from a personal project into a genuinely sustainable institution designed specifically to preserve fundamental values while simultaneously embracing appropriate evolutions during subsequent generations. This transformation, although painfully catapulted by a specific family betrayal, contemplated now during a symbolically appropriate sunset, as the celebration continued discreetly at the main facilities, had finally evolved from a personal project into a genuinely sustainable institution designed specifically to preserve fundamental values while simultaneously embracing appropriate evolutions during subsequent generations. This transformation, although painfully catapulted by a specific family betrayal, as we manually planted the first trees in the then arid land, never truly belongs to a specific individual, but to the values that completely transcend temporary personal possession. Our real work is to cultivate something that will eventually belong, fundamentally, to itself. That observation, seemingly philosophical during the intensely demanding practical implementation, had perfectly crystallized through recent events into a fundamental truth. An authentic legacy inevitably transcends conventional family relationships, manifesting finally through institutions specifically designed to preserve essential values, while evolving appropriately during successive generations. Sunrise Ranch, originally named for the daily moment when new possibilities emerge, as darkness gradually recedes, had experienced a genuine institutional rebirth through a painful but clarifying conflict. The new structure, although fundamentally different from traditional expectations about direct family continuity, paradoxically represented the most authentic preservation of the original vision that a conventional transfer to biological heirs would have ever guaranteed. As I quietly returned towards the main house, where the celebration continued discreetly, among diverse participants collectively representing the complete evolution of the ranch over 4 decades, I experienced an unwavering certainty that the decisions implemented, although painfully necessary from an immediate relational perspective, represented the most authentic manifestation of the fundamental responsibility towards the project that had defined my entire life, the effective protection of essential values, while simultaneously allowing for genuinely aligned evolutions during subsequent generations. My daughter-in-law knocked aggressively on the door at dawn, demanding immediate ownership over a legacy patiently built over decades. What she did not anticipate was that the actions implemented discreetly the day before would guarantee precisely that Sunrise Ranch would never fundamentally belong to a specific individual, but to the essential values that had catalyzed its original creation, and would guide its future evolution for subsequent generations. A lesson finally distilled through a painful but clarifying conflict. A truly significant legacy never consists fundamentally in the material transfer of specific possessions, but in the effective preservation of essential values, manifested tangibly through institutional structures, specifically designed to transcend the limitations inevitably associated with temporary personal relationships.